Good morning. We continue this series of the Jesus Revolution. Today we're looking at Called to a New Thing. Our scripture is from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. Now, up until this time, what Luke has recorded for us, Jesus has been, his ministry is solo. And today we're looking at, as he calls the first of the disciples to follow him. And the three that we come in contact with are Simon Peter, James, and John. The story unfolds that as Jesus' popularity has grown, he has been teaching and the crowds are coming closer and closer. In this occasion, Peter's in the boat by the shore and Jesus gets in the boat and actually, the boat was pulled up on the shore. Jesus gets in and asks him to push out into the shallow water so he can teach to the crowds there. Now, if you've been around water, you know that water makes a great sounding board. And generally, land goes up from the water, so it makes an amphitheater, sort of. And so this was a great place for Jesus to be and to teach. And poor Peter, he's a captive audience here in the boat with Jesus. Now, after they had been teaching for a while, they pushed out a little bit further into the lake. I want to talk about Lake Gennesaret. It's known by that name in Scripture. It's also known by the Sea of Tiberias and the Sea of Galilee. It's a 13-mile long lake, 8 miles wide. It's below sea level, almost 700 feet below sea level. And at the time of Jesus, it was very populated around the lake, although it's not so much today. There were 9 towns, each with at least 15,000 people scattered around the lake. And Jesus had been pushed out from the synagogue, as I said earlier, from the crowds were coming around him, but the synagogues were increasingly being closed to Jesus. And so we find him on the lake here teaching the people. Jesus, as we will see, would go anywhere that the people would gather and listen, and he would teach. It says that, they push out, and Jesus tells Peter, if you put your net down over on that side, you'll catch some fish. And Peter's response was, we've been fishing all night, Lord, and we didn't catch anything. But if you say so, I'll do it. Now, we shouldn't see here a miracle of Jesus bringing fish together for Peter to catch. What we should see is having eyes to see. There were in the lake schools of fish. And if you could see them, then you knew where to put the nets down to corral them into the nets. If you're familiar with the Manhattan fishery in the Chesapeake Bay, they have airplanes that fly in front of the boats, and they go out and scout for these schools of fish that they can be readily seen from the air that are not so readily apparent at level. And so that's what's most likely happening here, is that Jesus spotted the fish. Peter didn't see them, but he's willing to follow along and put the net down. When they start to pull the net in, it's full to overflowing, and Peter motions for his partners, James and John, to come and help him. And they have so many fish that it almost sinks both their boats as they pull them into the boat there. And in this exchange here, Peter sees something in Jesus that just causes him to know that this man that's there with him is a man from God. And he confesses to Jesus, I'm a sinner. You don't want anything to do with me. And yet Jesus' reply to Peter is, come follow me and I'll make you fishers of people. It's also worth noting here that in researching the genealogy that it's thought that James and John were cousins of Jesus. And it says here they were partners with Peter in fishing, meaning that they worked together when they went out to the nets that they used typically would be from one boat to another boat, and they would spread it out, and then the boats would go along and then sort of come together, trapping the fish in the nets there. James and John's father, Zebedee, ran the market. In other words, after they caught the fish, they would take the fish in to their Zebedee, and he would sell the fish to those that came. He ran the market there where they came. So it's sort of a family affair there. Fishers of people. In the early Christian church, the symbol of the fish was a very prominent and very important symbol within the church. And part of it stems from this. Another part of it is taking this symbol of the fish, and as persecution became more and more prevalent, people would not readily confess that they were a follower of Christ. That if you met someone out on the road and you thought that they might be a follower of Christ, you would take with your toe and you would trace in the sand a semicircle. And if the other person was also a follower of Christ, they would take their toe and they would complete that from the lower side. And you have that symbol of the fish there. It's also a tradition of the church has been that the head of the fish would point in the direction of where the Christians were gathering as they came together there. So we have here, as Jesus' ministry is continuing, that he's called some helpers. He's called some men that he will spend the next 3 years teaching them, along with 9 more men that he's going to call, his disciples, that will be equipped to go out into the world. It's interesting to me, as I consider this, that as Jesus was teaching in the synagogues, they closed him out. And so he went out to wherever the people were. And in many cases, the people that he was teaching were not welcome in the synagogues, or for whatever reason, some might be considered unclean. Their sins hadn't been properly atoned, or whatever, that those people would not be welcome in the synagogues, as Jesus was unwelcome. And so we find them coming together. In our Wesleyan heritage, as John Wesley preached more and more and confronted the religious leaders of his day, more and more the churches were barred to Wesley. And Wesley would go into the town square. This was his habit. He would go into the town square, and if there was a platform or whatever that he could climb up on, he would start singing hymns. And as the people gathered, then he would start teaching them and preaching to them. And that's the way Wesley's ministry grew after the closest churches were closed to him. I wonder if today that might be a model for us to follow. Instead of being closed up in our churches, that we were going out and drawing a crowd and sharing the good news. That's what evangelism is all about. That's what the mission of our United Methodist Church is, to make disciples of Christ for the transformation of the world. Here at Main Street, we've made that a little bit more personal, serving God, serving people, and serving God. Here in Bedford, Virginia, surrounding Main Street Church. Well, we'll see what Pastor Don has to say a little bit later in the morning, and I hope that you'll join us as we come together and continue this journey of looking at the Jesus Revolution. May God's blessings be upon you.